Hey everyone, and welcome back to the 11th episode of our R Programming for Beginners series. Now, in the last episode, we talked about conditional statements and how they allow R to take decisions based on a condition. And today, we are dealing with another aspect of R programming that controls the flow of the program. And they are loops inside of R. Loops help us in repeating tasks automatically instead of manually. Thus, they are a big help when it comes to repetitive tasks. So, without further ado, let's get to knowing about loops in R now, shall we? So, first of all, let's understand what a loop is. So, what are loops? A loop is a way to repeat tasks over and over again without typing the same line again and again. Now, what would you do if you wanted to print something 10 times in a row? If you have no knowledge about loops, you might think of writing the same print statement 10 times, which does work, but it is tedious and inefficient. Instead of writing 10 print commands, we can use a loop inside of R, and R does the repetition for us. So once the loop starts, it repeats tasks over and over again. So it repeats tasks and repeat tasks until a condition is met or until we stop the loop. Okay, now that we have a basic idea about what loops are, let's get to knowing about the types of loops inside of R. So there are three types of loops inside of R, and each loop repeats code, but the reason for repeating is different. First of all, we have the for loop, and this loop is used when the number of repetitions are countable. Next up, we have a while loop, which repeats something while a condition is true. That is, while loops repeat themselves until a condition becomes false. And then finally, we have the repeat loop, which runs indefinitely until we stop it manually. And like I said, all of these loops repeat code, but each repeats for a different reason. Now we'll break each one of these loops down one by one later on in the video with syntax and examples. But before we start working with them, let's get to know about loop control, since we will be needing these when we work with loops. So loops are powerful, but sometimes we need to skip or stop certain repetitions of the loops. That's where two of the keywords that help in loop control come in handy. First of all, let's say we want to stop a loop after a repetition. So an iteration is just a repetition. So if the loop has already repeated 3 times and is going to run again, that will be the 4th repetition or the 4th iteration. So let's say we want to stop a loop after the first iteration. That is, after the loop has run one time, we want to stop it for some reason. Well, that's where the break statement comes in. And this is one of the tools that we will be using in loop control. If we want to stop the loop after a certain number of repetitions, we can use the break statement and it will stop the loop for us. So a break statement completely stops the loop. And after the break statement, we have something what's called the next statement. And what this does is it skips the repetition that it is used inside of and moves over to the next repetition. So let's say we have repeated a loop one time, and during the next iteration we want to skip it. So when the next statement is used, it skips the second iteration, that is the second running of the loop, and directly moves on towards the third iteration. So that is what it does. It skips one iteration and continues to the next, hence the next keyword. So these keywords are used in order to control loops. And I know the theory might sound a bit confusing, but we will be using these practically inside our practical demonstration, which is going to happen right now. Okay guys, now I'm inside of the code in R compiler, and first of all I'm going to demonstrate to you guys how do you use the for loop. So the syntax for loop is, first you have to use the for keyword, and then inside of the for keyword and inside of these parentheses, you will have to use a variable to use inside of your loop. So first of all, we'll create the looping body, which is symbolized by these curly braces, and then inside of the for loop parentheses, we will create a variable I. Now this is also called a looping variable because this will be used inside of our loop. So we'll define for I in a range of values from 1 to 5. So inside each loop, I will first, so inside the first loop, I will first have the value of 1. Then after this loop is over, so let's say inside of our loop body, we say we want to print the value of I. So inside of a for loop, what happens is when you iterate through a range of numbers by using the in keyword, so for I in a range of numbers from 1 to 5, first of all, I will have the value of 1, and then it will after it prints the value of 1, it will loop over. And inside the next repetition, or let's say inside the next iteration, I will move on to the value of 2. So first of all, I inside the first iteration, so first, okay, my bad, that was meant to be a hashtag. So inside the first iteration, so let's say repetition to make it easier, I will equal to 1, and then in the second repetition, I will equal to 2. So that is how for loop works. So when I click on run, it will first print out 1, then the loop will be over, and the value of I will move from 1 to the value of 2, and likewise of all of the way until 5. After it prints 2, I will update to the value of 3, it will print out 3, print 3, and then after that I will update the value to 4, and it will print 4 because I value will be 4, and all the way up until 5. And if I did 10, it would print values upon all of the way up to 10. So that is basically how a for loop works. The variable I automatically takes each value in this sequence one by one, and you don't need to increment it manually. So that is how a for loop works inside of R. So we can use for loops in vectors as well, but that will be a topic that will come later in this video. So after a for loop, we will now be discussing a while loop. So while loop. Now for a while loop, you need a condition, a looping condition, and the while loop will run as long as the condition is true. That is, while the condition is true. So let's say we have a variable called x, and then we assign it a value of 1, right? Now we will define a while loop. While, a pair of parentheses, and let's define, or let's predefine the looping value or the looping body. So this is the body of the while loop, and inside this parentheses we will have to put the looping condition. Now let's say we want to run this loop as long as x's value is less than or equal to 5. So as long as x is less than or equal to 5, this, let's say we will print the value of x. Now you might notice that if we don't update the value of x, what it will run once, so it will print 1, and then it will check the condition once again. Is x less than or equal to 5? Well, x's value is 1, so of course x is less than or equal to 5. X is less than 5, that is 1 is less than 5. So since this condition is true, it will execute this code body once again. So in order to prevent infinite executions, you also need to keep one thing in mind when using a while loop. That is, you have to update the looping condition. So inside of our code body, we will update the value of x after each printing of x. So we'll increase the value of 1. So what will happen when we execute the while loop? So first of all, the value of x will be 1, right? So it will print 1, and then this statement will update the value of x. So the value of x will be 2, since x equals to x plus 1. So it will check the condition once again. Is x's value less than 5? Well, after our first loop, the x's value will be 2, which is less than 5. That is, x, which is 2, is less than 5. So the loop will run once again. So what will be the x's value at this point? It will be 2. And after that, it will print out 2. Once again, the value of x will update. And this will go on until x's value increases to 6. So since 6 is not less than or equal to 5, all of this will not execute since our condition is false. So let's execute this and see what it prints out. So like I said, it will be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And as soon as we print 5, so at this low, so let's say the value of x is 5, right? So now 5 is equal to 5, so it will once again run this whole code body. So at this point, x's value is 5. Now after that, it will increase the value of x to 6, since we have increased the value of x after we print out 5. So after this point, it will increase the value of x to 6. Now once again, it will try to check the condition. Now since 6 is not less than nor equal to 5, it will skip this whole while loop entirely and then move out to rest of the code. So let's say if we write here print I am over, what will happen? So it will first of all execute all of this loop over and over again, since this condition will be true for x's values up until 5, and then finally when this condition is false, it will move on to rest of the code. So once we are finished with the condition, it will print out I am over. And that is the basic gist of how a while loop works. Now what would happen if we miss this increment condition? What would happen if we just print out the value of x? What would happen is it would keep on printing and printing the value of 1, and this loop will go on executing over and over again, since the condition is technically always true, and it might crash your browser as well. So always remember, when you use a while loop, you should put in an increment or a decrement condition which will take you out of that while loop. So in our case, what we did was we increased the value by 1. Oh, I'm sorry, this should be an arrow. So we increase the value of x by 1. So that was how a while loop works. Now after a while loop, what we will do is we will look at the repeat loop. Now the repeat loop is a bit different. It doesn't need any condition to run or a range of values to run. So what we saw with for loops is it needs a range of values, or later as we will look, or vectors, since for loops can be used for vectors as well, in order to run, right? And as for our while loops, it needs a condition to run, right? But for our repeat loop, it doesn't need any condition to run. So doesn't need anything to run. So for our repeat loops, how do you define a repeat loop? Let's first create a variable y and then assign it a value of 1. So after that, we will use a repeat keyword to initiate the repeat loop. And you might notice, since it doesn't need anything to run, it doesn't even have parentheses. We will just need a pair of curly braces, and then we will write anything that we want to repeat over and over again. So let's say I want to repeat the value of y. So we will print the value of y, and if we just leave it as it is, it will once again, okay, let me copy all of this. If we just repeat it as it is, okay, let's say we will increment the value of y as well. So it will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It will keep on going and on going. So if we leave it as it is, what we will do is run this, and then it will keep on going and going. Okay, I have to quickly reload this page because I don't want this website to crash. So what will happen is it will keep on going and going, and it will never stop, right? So in order to make it stop, we will need a break and continue statement like we discussed before. So as we increment the value of y to by 1 in each iteration, okay, this should be 1, and then after that we will define a condition to stop this loop. So as we discussed before, there are two things that you can use to control a loop. First is the break statement, which stops the loop entirely, stops the loop. And then we have the continue statement. And then we have the next statement, which skips one iteration, which, okay, let's not say which, skips the current repetition or iteration. So in order to stop our repeat loop, let's say we want to stop our loop once y's value reaches 5. So we can define a condition by using the if statement. That is, if y's value goes greater than 5, that is, if y's value starts to reach 6, we will break this loop. So what will happen if we run this? It will print out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is, once y's value reaches 5, so let's comment this, y's value reaches 5, it will try to update the value of y, and it will be successful. That is, y's value will be 6. And then after that, it will look at this condition, y's value is 6. So 6 is greater than 5. This is true, so it will break the loop entirely, and then it will get out of the loop. So let's observe that by typing print, and then print I am over once again. So it will print out 1 2 3 4 5. It will break out of the loop. So it will print out I am over only after the repeat loop has done finishing by this break statement right here. So let's say I print out inside of the loop, so print going on, right? Now when I click on run, you will notice that when the value of y is 1, and it will increase the value of it will print the value of 1 first, that is print the value of y first, then it will increase the value, then it will print on going on, and then increment to 2. So you can see that what is happening during each iteration. First it will print the value of y, which in this case is 1, so 1 is printed, then the value of y is incremented to 2, then it will check the condition, is y more than 5? Since 2 is not more than 5, it will not break our loop. It will go on to the next line. So it will print going on. And once again, our loop will repeat. It will print on 2. Since the y's value is 2 already, so it will print on 2. So it will print on 2. And then it will increment the value of y to 3. It will check the condition once again. Since this is false, it will not break. It will print going on once again. So that will repeat over and over till the value is 5. So like I explained before, once the value of y is 5, it will print 5, it will increment the value of y to 6, check the condition. Since the condition is true, y is more than 5, says 6 is more than 5, so it will break the loop, and then finally it will print I am over. So that is how the break statement works. So after all this, let's remove all of the code and then show how the next statement works. So I will show you a bit of code which will demonstrate the break once again and the next both in the same code block, that is our for loop. So let's say for I in a range of values from 1 to 10, we will want to first of all, let's say print I, but let's say we want to add a bit of condition checks first. Let's say we don't want to print the value of 4. So when we will do if i's value is equal to 4, we will use next, that is we will skip 4. So how next and break works is once the break statement or the next statement is executed, all of the code below this statement is ignored, like you saw with this going on. Once the value of y reached 6 in our previous example, it skipped the statement of print going on and ended the loop immediately. So that will happen. Once the value of I reaches 4, it will skip this print statement and move on to the next iteration. That is, it will update the value of I from 4 to 5. And let's say if I reaches the value of 8, we want to stop the loop. So we will do break. So this will stop the loop entirely. Forgive my spelling. So when we will do run, you can see that it will print out 1 2 3. So after it is done printing on 3, what will happen? The value of I will move on from 3, I equals 3, to I equals 4. So it will move on from the value of 3 to 4. And it will check the condition. Is i's value equal to 4? Yes, since this is true, it will execute the next statement, which will skip all of this entirely and move on to the next iteration. So if you notice, this print 4 is not executed, hence 4 is not outputted inside of our output. So 4 is not printed. It is skipped to the next iteration. So i's value moves from 4 to 5. It will check the condition, this is false, so next will not execute, and I is not equal to 8 as well, it is equal to 5, so break will not execute as well, and it will print 5. So it goes on, and once i's value reaches 8, it will break the statement, so i's value, that is 8, is not printed out. So that is how next and break work inside of R, and I hope that is really clear to you guys. Now after this topic, we will look into how loops can work well with vectors inside of R. Now, if you don't know what vectors are or how they work inside of R, you can check out episode 5 of our R Programming for Beginners series. It'll teach you exactly that. So let's move on to the slides first, and then we will look inside of our code, that is our compiler. So loops are most useful when you are working with multiple values, right? And in R, those values are often stored inside vectors. So loops work well with vectors. A loop allows R to go through a vector one element at a time. So loops allow R to process each element of a vector, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, each element individually, one value at a time. So they give you a chance to look at each value individually. This especially is helpful when different values need different decisions or actions. So if there are individual values of a vector and there is a loop, it will take those values individually and it will give individual output. Now in this case, we haven't done anything to the values, but inside of our example, we will. In the next example, we will see how a loop checks each number inside of a vector and responds differently depending upon its value. So let's head inside of our compiler now. So let's remove this and let's talk about loops with vectors. So for that, I'll create a vector with on the combine function, and we will store a value. Okay, for those of you who don't know what a vector is basically a collection of values. So a vector in our case will be 2, 5, 8, 11, and let's say 14. So this is a collection of values, and we combine this collection into a vector using the combine function, that is C. So numbers stores a vector, or let's say numbers is a vector of these numbers right here. Now we will loop through these numbers individually using a for loop. So for n, so this is a looping variable, and we define this to store the individual value of a vector during each repetition. So during our first repetition, the value of 2 will be stored inside n. Inside of our next repetition, the value of 5 will be stored, and next 8, 11, and then finally 14. So for n, or let's say to make it easier, for value in numbers, so an individual value, or let's say an individual number inside of vectors, we will output a different output depending upon the value of each number. So if our number is greater than 10, we will use something called paste. Now paste is a function in R which sticks words or numbers together into one sentence so that you can print them neatly in a single line. So in our case, we will do paste, and then we want to paste our number first. So number, and then we want to print is large, since this number is greater than 10. Or else, if the number is not greater than 10, we want to print our combination, that is paste, number, and then is small. So what are we doing inside of this for loop? First of all, we are looping through the vector, and during each iteration, so during the first repetition or iteration, so let's say repetition or iteration 1, the number is equal to 2, since that is the first value inside of our vector. So it will check, first of all, it will store 2 inside of this number value, and then it will check if 2 is greater than 10. Since it is not greater than 10, it will output this value. And then inside of our second iteration, so let's say iteration 2, the value of number will update to the next value. So after 2, we have the value of 5 inside of our vector. So the value of number will store 5. It will compare 5 greater than 10 or not, and then if it is greater than 10, it will execute this, and since 5 is not greater than 10, it will execute this line once again, and once again this process will repeat. The number value will store the next value, that is 8, compare, then again the value will update to the next value, so number will store 11, again this loop will execute, and it will come to 14, and after all of the values are iterated, or let's say the number value has stored the value of all of these values individually, that is 2 first of all, that is first of all 2, and then 5, 8, 11, 14, the loop will finally be over since it has iterated through all of these elements of the vector, and then our program will stop. So it will say 2 is small, since first of all the value will be 2, it will update to 5, it will compare this comparison and it will print 5 is small, and again with each element. Okay, I know I repeated the same points again and again, but I hope that you understood how loops work with vectors. So this is a basic idea of it. And now that we understand about this as well, let's finally head over to our summary slide. So that was it for this video. And as a recap of today's topics, these are the concepts that you learned today. We learned what a for and while and repeat loops are. There's for loop loops through a fixed range of values or vectors, and it is repeated fixed number of times. Whereas the while loop repeats while a condition stays true. And finally, the repeat loop runs infinitely until we use the break statement. And then talking about break and next, we also learned that break statement breaks, or let's say stops, the loop entirely, whereas next skips the current iteration and then moves on to the next repetition. And finally, we also learned how the for loop can be used with vectors to loop through individual vector values beautifully. So that was it for today's video. In the next video, we will be discussing and working with functions inside of R, which are a good way of reusing code. So I hope you don't forget to tune in for that. If you like this video or found this video helpful in any way at all, please drop a like and subscribe to our channel for more such videos. And until the next time, bye bye and happy coding.